here, and today we're going to talk about how we can build our meeting skills. So one of the issues with being a new manager or being a manager is that we come into a meeting having thought about the problems we want to discuss, and we often have an idea of the solution. And what that can mean is that we are seen by the others in the meeting as having a predetermined outcome. So one of the things we want to think about is just how do we assess ourselves and how do we run a meeting in such a way that people feel like they're involved. And in fact, we might discover that someone has a better idea or a better solution than we do. One of the things that's important to consider is that everybody in the meeting has an agenda in the sense that there's something they want. Sometimes it's as simple as, I want to get out of here as quickly as possible. Sometimes it's, I don't want any work to fall on me. Sometimes it's, I really disagree with this proposal. So it can help us as managers going into a meeting to consider, where are the other people in the meeting coming from? What's their sort of background or likely position? And in fact, sometimes it might even be helpful to speak to one or two people before the meeting about their thoughts about what it is that we're going to be discussing. You have to be a little bit careful about that because it can seem like you're playing politics, but I think it can be of assistance in some circumstances to understand where people are coming from before you actually enter the meeting yourself. Another thing to consider is the difference between the push and pull factors in a meeting. So as managers, we often default to a push style because we want to get things done. We've got the logic in our heads and we use directness to kind of get compliance. But true influence, especially in a collaborative kind of environment, thrives more on the pull approach, which is motivating others to want to change. Sometimes directness can be seen as kind of being blunt or harsh. So the goal is to balance your natural clarity with warmth and connection, fostering genuine collaboration with respect to whatever it is that the meeting's discussing. Another element of the art of using pull or influence in a meeting is to really ensure that you engage in active listening, to be fully present. Sometimes in meetings, you can see people actually doing something else. So how can we make sure we're fully present? Also, we want to wait a bit to respond. So when someone says something, we're not listening to respond to them, we're listening to actually hear them. So we want to perhaps wait just a moment longer than we feel is comfortable before we respond to something to show that we're actually taking it on board. And hopefully that will actually give us a chance to think for a second about what it is the best way to respond in a way that doesn't shut down a discussion, but helps to, I guess, continue that discussion, to perhaps build on the idea that's been expressed, and to genuinely continue to have an open debate about an idea. The other thing we can do is we could do a bit of a summarize and a verification, which is also a part of active listening, to really kind of say, okay, so what I hear you saying is blah, and I just want to check that's correct. The other thing we can do is some strategic questioning, so asking probing questions. So what might be some of the things that you're exploring? Another thing we can do is engage in strategic questioning. We can ask more kind of reflective questions. We can ask clarifying questions. When you said this, did you mean this? Just to kind of explain it in a way that we make sure we understand, but also that other people in the meeting are understanding the point that's being made. The other thing too is that we can kind of set up the meeting by crafting compelling messages. So by framing at the outset of the meeting what the meeting is about and the background, we can then make it easier for people to know what's in and what's out of our discussion. Another point to consider is to notice the non-verbal cues. So a significant portion of communication, as we know, is non-verbal. It's more about body language, etc. So we can use it ourselves, more open postures, a calm and warm voice, and use appropriate eye contact with people so that we are injecting some warmth into the messages that we are giving, and also we can show that we are listening by maintaining that eye contact without being too bizarre about it. The other thing that's useful is you can ask someone who hasn't contributed, say, I would be really interested to hear what you have to say on this, and just let the person speak. Influence is actually earned through trust and genuine relationships. So I guess the important thing is that we are trying to do the best for our people, showing genuine interest in them before we end up in a meeting. And also that we are as transparent as we can be. We can't breach confidentiality about things that might be happening that we're not supposed to tell others about. But where we can be as upfront and open about what's happening, where we expect to be going, and so on, so that people feel that they've got all the information that they can get. Sometimes we can explain that we don't have all the information that we would like either. Another thing to consider is that you might have been in other meetings, perhaps with senior managers, about the very issue you're going to discuss. You've been pondering the issue for a while, perhaps. So you kind of have a bit of a sense of the background, why the decision has to be made, and so on. And sometimes that kind of expertise that we have around whatever it is that's going to be discussed isn't shared with everybody else. So they may not actually know where this is coming from. So sometimes it's good to explain simply and clearly why this decision has to be made or why this discussion is being held. And that can help people to kind of come along on the journey that you perhaps unthinkingly have already been on and bring them up to speed with why we're at this point of talking about this issue or talking about this decision. Another way of thinking about the way that managers can run meetings in the most effective way is to be thinking of yourself as a facilitator of discussion rather than the, I guess, director of the outcome. Of course, at the end of the day, you might have to make the decision, so you might be deciding the outcome. But in that case, when you've done a meeting which is facilitated, where everyone's heard, where the idea is put out in the table, everyone gets to have an opportunity to discuss it, to critique the idea, obviously not critiquing the person, then we come away from that meeting with a decision which has involved the input of people rather than us going in with a predetermined decision. But we can also make sure that the discussion stays on track. We can't just be talking endlessly. No one has time for that. So having a clear purpose and an agenda, even if it's just a dot point agenda, can be very helpful. Also, providing any sort of data or information in advance, which can help people. Also, creating space for dissent can be very important in facilitating. So deliberately saying, I'm very happy for people to disagree with any of the ideas, but we're disagreeing with the ideas, not with the person who proposes it. And also, you can say, if you find that things are sort of getting a bit time consuming, you could even say in your agenda or in the meeting, we're going to allow 10 minutes for this, 15 minutes for that, whatever, to try and keep control. And I think another thing that's very helpful is to finish the meeting by explaining exactly what was decided and who is responsible and by when that will be accomplished. So if you finish a meeting in that way, that means everyone's very clear on what we're doing next, and that can be very helpful. Over time, you get to know who's in your team. And so when you're having a meeting, hopefully you've got a pretty good sense of who prefers something direct and who prefers to discuss the broader strategy and who prefers to discuss the details, and there might be a mix of these. So one of the things to do is to balance, your sense of clarity with kindness by kind of acknowledging that, not necessarily explicitly, but just in the way that you perhaps suggest someone's contributions, like so and so, you're really good with the details. How would you see this working? Or I haven't heard from you, and you're really good with the sort of big picture. How do you think this fits into the other things we're trying to achieve? So without being artificial about it, what you're trying to do is create a collaborative environment with a certain degree of warmth while also getting the work done. So one of the key things that's really important in any team is the amount of trust that people have between each other and also between you as the manager. So if I don't trust that my comments won't be used against me, I'm not going to contribute them. So in order to have a full and robust discussion, you really need everyone to trust that no one's going to be criticizing them for comments they make. The comments they make are not going to get them into trouble. That revealing that they've made a mistake won't get them into trouble. But that we're all in a situation where we're trying to learn, we're all trying to work together to achieve a common outcome. And so it's quite a safe environment for people to contribute their ideas. As long as we're critiquing the ideas and not the actual person, then that's fine. That's how we get sort of a robust discussion of ideas. But also, in addition to that, the very act of like having open discussions and being transparent about things that have gone wrong can help to build that very trust that we're trying to create in a team. So it is really important, and it tends to be iterative. It increases over time. The other thing about having a robust discussion where everyone's had a chance to say what they really think is that there's much more commitment to the outcome. So people feel like, well, even though the decision wasn't exactly what I wanted, I do feel like my views were heard, and I'm therefore committed to the implementation because I've been involved in the discussion, and therefore I feel a greater accountability for it. Whereas on the opposite side, where a team is distrustful, what tends to happen is what Patrick Lencioni described in his 5 dysfunctions of a team, where there's no trust, there's no constructive conflict, there's no commitment to the outcome, and there's no accountability taken because I didn't get to speak, I didn't want to speak, I didn't agree with it, I didn't tell anyone that I didn't agree with it, but I'm not committed to it, and I'm not going to do anything about it because I didn't agree with it, and I didn't get to say anything because I didn't want to say anything. So if you look at those two extremes, you can see why trust is very important. So here are a few ideas that we can implement over 5 days, just taking 5 minutes over each of those 5 days to practice some of these ideas. And if they work well, then you could roll them out more broadly. If they don't work so well, then you can come back and have a think about how they might work better. So the first one on day one is just to practice using that strategic pause, consciously waiting a few seconds before responding to show that you're genuinely listening, but also to think about how you're going to respond in a way that kind of builds trust, but also respects the person who's made that suggestion. And sometimes to frame your response in a way that doesn't critique the person, but critiques the idea. On day two, we want to ask one probing or clarifying question instead of immediately offering a solution. Again, as managers, the temptation is to say, well, I know how to fix that, and here's the answer. Sometimes it's better to actually ask a clarifying question to make sure we understand the situation fully and don't jump to a conclusion, but also to respect the person who's asking the question, and perhaps sometimes to allow them to come up with the answer themselves when you clarify. Actually, by clarifying it and asking a question, you allow them to come to the solution themselves. So there's a few different benefits from those sort of probing or clarifying questions. On day three, in your third 5 minutes, you just want to pick a particular meeting and consciously relax your posture, avoid crossing your arms, maintain a calm and steady vocal tone. One of the questions you can ask yourself at the end of that meeting is whether it created a more relaxed tone or whether you felt the meeting went better. So that, although again, you don't want to be artificial, sometimes these cues that you're giving can help to relieve some tension that people are feeling about a meeting. On day four, have a go at explicitly stating the purpose of the meeting, a single clear goal or outcome. On your fifth and final day, before you finish a meeting, take a moment to say what was decided and who is responsible and by when it needs to be completed. And then make a note over the next short while to see whether that's meant you've had to do less chasing up and whether that actually meant that that was done without additional input from you. Because it might be that a lot of your time is taken up with chasing people. And if this system works well, then you may not have to chase people, and that saves you time for doing other important things. The other thing you might like to do in your last 5 minutes is to just put a note in your calendar to actually sit back and reflect on how these, I guess, attempts, these small experiments have gone, and whether any of them particularly worked well, and whether you could roll them out to other meetings, or whether there might be some other elements you might want to take on and try out as a small experiment from here on in. I hope you enjoyed that video. Please check out my website, dominicmclaughlin.com, and check out my free course on businessleaderslab.com.